Hey everybody, thanks for coming to my talk, and let's go to the next slide here. This is my introduction to keeping saltwater aquariums. A lot of this might be review for somebody who has a saltwater aquarium already. It might be a little bit easier to comprehend if you have a freshwater tank because a lot of these principles are similar. Hopefully you'll be able to get some good information about this. This presentation could go on for, we got 3 hours right now. Hopefully I'll get to be able to make it a little bit shorter in 30 minutes, but if anybody has interests and want to talk further on the subject, feel free to reach out to me. And if there's a need to expand upon this, I'd be happy to do so. So a little bit about me. I was a kid who spent too much time on forums and aquarium shops growing up. I'd spend a lot of time there, and actually my college entrance essay was the first time I stepped foot into an aquarium shop. It really changed my life, and I went to school for zoology. I got my bachelor's of science from the University of Florida, which made my mom very happy. And I got my master's degree in hormonal induction spawning and fisheries and aquatic sciences. I'm the Collier County Sea Grant Extension Agent, and that's my contact info there. And me when I was 15 years old with a chameleon over there, and me a couple days ago with my 2 reef aquarium to the side. So keeping fish in aquariums, there's a very early origin. So the ancient Sumerians about 4,500 years ago began keeping fish. The ancient Romans about 1000 BCE kept fish. Then I think the big thing with the ornamental industry and ornamental breeding happened with the Chinese and the Japanese, who made different varieties of goldfish and carp and koi, which are very beautiful. The first recognizable glass aquarium started in 1832 by a French naturalist, and it was mainly made to house aquatic plants. And shortly after, they started adding aquatic fish, uh, aquatic amphibians, reptiles. And in 1853, the first public display aquarium was in London. And in 1856, the first display aquarium came to America, and it was actually at the American Museum in New York City. And P.T. Barnum, the circus entrepreneur, opened that up. So thank you to him. Technology has increased exponentially since then. So the aquarium on the top, you can see that's sort of the old 1800 style, while on the bottom to the right, you could basically use that technology to fly to the moon. And don't let that scare you. All of that systems that you see there is just automation in order to make it a little bit easier. You could do the same sort of system with a Rubbermaid container with following proper filtration and biological properties. And aquariums in America, they're popular. So a survey by the American Pet Products Association in 2017-18 showed that about 12% of the population has an aquarium, and Generation Y was the largest group that has aquariums. They're growing in popularity with the younger folk, and they're definitely something that people have here. And why would you want a headache? I mean, an aquarium. Because it doesn't shed, doesn't jump, you don't have to walk it, you don't have to bring it to a kennel when you go away. And if you want thousands of small pets, that's great, because each one of those polyps is an individual animal. But no, they're great. And there's a lot of positive health benefits to owning an aquarium and just viewing nature. They're good for people that may be experiencing dementia or Alzheimer's, seeing a bunch of different fish moving around, seeing landscape views. They're sort of a good keystone in terms of at your house, bringing some light in and some nature in there. So there's plenty of different articles out there if you'd like to read the health benefits of that. And that really sort of explains why they're so popular in children's hospitals and retirement homes, because they're very beneficial for your cognition and development. So types of marine aquariums. There's biotopes, and a biotope is a sort of replicating a specific environment, which somebody who goes out to the beach might say, hey, I want to make a seagrass bed, so I'm only going to put pinfish and things that I find in that area. So that's what a biotope would be. And there's brackish water aquariums, cold water aquariums, jellyfish. And really the reason you would choose maybe one of those is if you want a specific organism that you really like. So brackish water if you want archer fish, or you want mono sea bay or cool fish like that. they live in those brackish waters, while cold water, that goby right over there is called a Catalina goby, and they sing their siren song and try to get people to keep them in aquaria, but they're actually a cooler water fish, and they won't do well in like regular reef aquaria. So people will buy chillers and house them and sort of accommodate their special needs. Then there's jellyfish tanks, which you need a special tank for that. It's called a chrysal that has a flowing movement, because jellyfish, if they get caught in a corner, they can die. So it's a gentle rolling flow that they need for that. Then there's fish only tanks, which you would see at maybe a Bass Pro Shop or a casino or something, with fake ornamentation and just a bunch of pretty fish in there. Then there's fish only live rock systems. And the live rock is mainly there for biological filtration. And we're going to go in depth on that in more slides. And really, it's hard to find fish only live rock systems. That's sort of an older kind of technology. Most people now will, put a couple corals in that tank. And that upper right picture was actually hard for me to find, because I kept on finding soft corals in those tanks. Then the most of those marine aquarists will have reef tanks. So there's soft corals, mixed reefs, which have soft corals, large polyp stonies, and SPS, which are small polyp stony corals. So there's so many taxonomic differences in corals, but for the hobbyist's sake, they're broken down into soft corals, large polyp stony corals, like a brain coral, and then small polyp stony corals, which can be those branching ones to the bottom right that you're really, sort of familiar with that reef kind of structure, and or they have some encrusting varieties of that. And corals grow, and they're pretty cool and pretty valuable and awesome, so a lot of people will actually clip them and use glue them to little substrates and make frag tanks. So that's another really popular reef kind of tank, where you grow coral fragments, and maybe you're not really into the aesthetics as it is, but more so the growing of the coral. So before you fill your tank, or even before you buy your tank, do your research. So know what you're getting involved with, assess your experience level. You might not want to buy a very expensive fish at first, because that could be a big investment there, but a lot of people will buy that fish to the right that you see. That's called a mandarin goby, but it's actually a dragonet. And that's a lot of people's first fish, but they're really something that you want to have in an established aquarium, because they have a very specific dietary requirement of eating small invertebrates like copepods and amphipods. So unfortunately, they don't last too long in new aquariums. So assess your experience level. The same thing with seahorses and sharks and a whole bunch of stuff. Plan what you want to put in there before you actually, start your tank. See how many fish you like. Plan for the larger size of that fish can grow. So you could get like a 2-inch blue hippo tank, but that fish can grow up to 10 inches. So sort of have your stocking list and know the space requirements you need for all the organisms you want to put in there. Know how much money that's going to take, in terms of building a larger aquarium, having more intensive equipment, maybe even the electricity bill, so running larger pumps. Know your time frame, in terms of how long is that aquarium going to stay there. Are you going to move soon? Maybe it's better to buy a smaller tank that you can sort of move around a little bit more easier. That's hard on the tank. Or, like I said, with that mandarin goby, that does better in more established systems. So, it takes time to develop all this. Ambient temperature, or do you live in a cold climate? Do you live in a hot climate? You might need a heater. You might need a chiller, depending on where you live. What do you do when the power goes out? That's a big one, especially if you live in Florida. Hurricane season's coming up. It's actually in full swing right now. And it might be a good time to start buying some used aquariums, because unfortunately a lot of people don't plan, and sometimes it's disheartening to start over from the wreckage. So, have your water made, have some sort of chemicals to mitigate ammonia effects, have aerators. If you have a expensive enough aquarium, it might even be worth buying a generator to run it over until you get power. Stay away from windows and vents. Putting it next to a window can sort of increase the temperature, or the added light can make unwanted algae grow. Vents can make the tank cool faster than you want it to in certain times. So stability is key for this, really. You want everything to be as stable as you can and as constant as you can. And do you really want your tank on the carpet? Do you want it on the second floor? These are all things that you want to really think of, because water weighs salt water weighs about 8.6 pounds per gallon, and it's going to be very heavy once you fill it. So these are some parameters of a saltwater fish tank. Obviously, they're just for the reef and the fish-only live rock. These are rough parameters. You know, other people have higher nitrates, all sorts of different stuff, but stability is key. The big thing to really look for a saltwater fish tank is your specific gravity, which will be your measure of salinity. That's also measured in PPT, or parts per thousand, which would be grams per liter. A typical reef tank would be about 30 to 35 parts per thousand. And don't worry, there's instructions for all this on the box of salt and whatever you're gonna research. So don't be scared from all these different parameters, but salinity, alkalinity is big. It helps you maintain that higher pH by having their carbonate in there, and it's also needed for your biological filtration, as well as if you have invertebrates like those corals. They use the calcium carbonate to build their skeletons up. So calcium is another thing to watch, and then magnesium is a big thing too, because calcium and carbonate makes calcium carbonate, and it'll precipitate out of the water. So having magnesium will bind to that sort of carbonate and prevent that and make that more bioavailable. Iodine and strontium are both elements that are sort of trace elements, and if you're maintaining water changes, you shouldn't really have to dose them too often. So filtration, I'm starting with this before anything else because this is what any good aquarium is based on. So there's biological, mechanical, and chemical filtration. Biological filtration is your beneficial bacteria. These are nitrogen fixing bacteria, or not nitrogen fixing, nitrogen oxidizing bacteria. So they'll convert it from, the fish will eat the food, the food will degrade into ammonia or ammonium, depending on the pH and temperature. And that will get oxidized by these bacteria to nitrite, and then nitrate. And each step of the way, it becomes less toxic, but that process is called nitrogen cycling, or that's the nitrogen cycle. So if you hear of somebody saying, I cycled my tank, that's what they're talking about. But denitrification is a little bit more difficult, and that's how you maintain it, with either having your plants, if you have plants in your tank, or doing periodic water changes, or even corals. They have that symbiotic relationship with zooxanthellae, and they can use up a little bit of that nitrate. Mechanical filtration really only works as long as you sort of remove those solids from the water. So mechanical filtration will capture particulate, whether that's fish poop, unwanted food, all sorts of stuff like that, and allow you to remove that from the water before it can become mineralized into the water and sort of affect your water quality. So that's done by changing out your filter pads, washing your filter pads, changing out your skimmer cup, siphoning detritus, all that good stuff. Chemical filtration, there's activated carbon, there's granulated ferric oxide, there's a bunch of proprietary blends. Not everybody uses it, but they're pretty common, and that's something to look for. And your tank is going to have, both mechanical, biological, chemical in there. Cycling your tank, I said that was detecting your ammonia or your ammonium to nitrate. And once that occurs, your tank is cycled. You just do a water change and start adding your livestock in there. And I could go into depth if you guys want more information on that. And a sump is a tank that usually occurs on the bottom of your tank that increases your water volume, which dilution is the solution for pollution. So a larger tank is actually easier to maintain, better water quality in terms of not having these drastic swings that you might have with evaporation. And you could put increased water filtration systems in there. So the cool thing about this is, the principles that work in a 1 gallon aquarium are the same principles that work in a 1 million gallon aquarium. So this is a typical sort of filtration system. This is on my frag tank. You have your mechanical filtration here, which is my filter sock, and then my foam fractitioner, which is otherwise as a protein skimmer. Then I have this chemical filtration, which is ChemiPure. Biological filtration, which is that live rock and ceramic media, making that those surfaces that beneficial bacteria can live on. Then there is biological filtration with this macroalgae, or this algae that I have growing on here. They're called chaetomorpha, and they'll eat up your nitrates. And then mechanical filtration with that filter pad. So it doesn't have to cost a lot of money. You know, this is something I just put baffles in, and you can build a budget aquarium. So the tank, this is almost the least important aspect of a tank. For me, it's what's on the inside, and you can see that from, you know, tanks can be pretty much anything. I've been to somebody's house where they have so many tanks, it's almost like a cat lady. They have Rubbermaid bins just filled with sand and a sponge filter, and it works great. You can see that tank on the bottom here is a fiberglass trough that coral farmers often use. You can, you know, I've seen concrete painted with epoxy paint that works, but most tanks you'll see out there are usually glass or acrylic, and there's different sizes. There's Pico, Nuno, Normal, Monster, just really depending. You know, like the larger the tank, like I said, the less swings that you might have and the easier it might be to maintain that water quality initially. Interesting shapes, you know, there could be bow front cylindrical tanks. They can be, you know, if you watch the show Tank, they have a lot of tanks that I immediately see and I say, oh man, that's going to be a pain in the butt to clean that corner of that tank, or that might not actually work, but that's a drum set tank that you heard it not tapping on the glass, that's tapping on a bunch of stuff. And then there's specialty glasses, you know, low iron glass has better clarity, you know, it might be more expensive, but some manufacturers might make the front pane that low iron glass while the sides can be normal. And then there's all-in-one aquariums, which is a great way to start off on the hobby, where you have, it's about the size of a larger tube TV. You know, they have different sizes, 8 gallons to 32 gallons and up. But you have your light and your hood over there. And then in the back, they have filtration in the back, which could be either like a wet dry filter or a refugium. So it's an all-in-one, and with that lid, you have less evaporation. So you have you don't have to worry about those swings as much. It's just worrying about the stocking density. You don't want to overstock it, but they're a great, easy way to get started in the hobby. Salt and supplements. So water changes. What's a water change? You might hear that a bunch. It's just maintenance on your tank, getting away those excess nutrients in terms of phosphates and nitrates that will occur from biological processes, degrading food, all sorts of stuff like that. Natural seawater versus salt mixes. Traditionally, you know, people use seawater, but you might be introducing pathogens, and not that many people actually use that anymore because, you know, coastal waters might not be as quality, or they might not have access. So the pre-made salt mixes are a really easy way. You just use RODI water, reverse osmosis deionized water, add that salt in there, and you're good to go. And you know, doing that water change will actually, you know, supply trace elements and minerals that will be depleted from your corals or other organisms growing. What's two-part dosing? Two-part dosing is really common in aquariums, or marine aquariums if you have coral especially, and that's using your calcium and your alkalinity, and you add those in different parts, because if you added them together, they'd just precipitate and fall out of the water. And that's really important to do. There's tons of additional supplements out there. Some of them are snake oil, some of them are, you know, really, a lot of people like, you know, a certain one here or there, amino acids, all sorts of stuff. But if you go to a shop, it might look like a GNC in terms of how many choices you have, like a health food store. And it's important to test your water parameters. You know, listen to the bottle, but at the same time, you sort of take it easy, because if you have a 30-gallon aquarium, you don't really have 30 gallons of water, because you have rocks, sand, livestock displacing it. So you might have 20 gallons of water. So start off small, you know, test your water, see how fast your tank uses up those, you know, chemicals, nutrients, alkalinity, calcium, and then go from there. So live rock, why do I have a slide on that? Because this is sort of the base of, you know, marine and reef aquaria. So it's a form of biological filtration. It has a lot of surface area associated with it, and these deep nooks and crannies that they think that they could have those denitrification or those anaerobic processes take place. It historically was harvested really because there was no other choice. And it came from the Indo-Pacific, Fiji, Marshall Islands, Tonga, all that stuff. And each one of them, it was actually pretty neat. They had different characteristics of different kind of coralline algae, from purple to sky blue to different shapes of rocks. But nowadays they're either dry rock, which is live rock that, you know, has been harvested in the past and has these organics in there that you need a sort of cure, or it's aquacultured rock, where people harvest rock from land and put it offshore and then go harvest it back. And you're not creating these destructive behaviors of, ruining a reef or, sort of taking it out of the environment. You're sort of putting it in there and then come and collecting it later. You might get hitchhikers on your rocks. Some of them could be good, some of them can be bad, depending on if they're a pest or not. There's manufactured rock. There's a bunch of different stuff out there. And if you'd like to know more, feel free to contact me. So substrate, traditionally, a lot of reef aquariums, they like to go for the more natural look. So the colored gravel isn't really a thing. So a lot of these are sand or crushed coral or agonite. It's just different forms of calcium carbonate, whether it's made from abiotic factors or biotic factors, like, just crushed coral, shell bottom over time. And these are, they're pretty much made out of the same thing, like how a graphite is carbon and so is a diamond. But they have different properties to them, different sizes. Larger substrate might be harder to blow away, but you might have more detritus buildup in there. So stuff to consider there. Deep sand bed, that's a process that's sort of dated, where they would have a deep sand bed to sort of boost the anaerobic bacteria to create more denitrification areas, but those can be a little iffy because you can release some bad stuff if you start stirring that up. And then bare bottom, that's something that I recently did, and you could put a lot more flow in your tank because you're not blowing around the substrate around, and that flow can, sort of move that detritus and allow your mechanical filtration to get that for you so you can remove it from your tank. So lighting, I'm going to go pretty fast on some of these things because there's a lot more slides, but may or may not be important, just depending. If you have fish only, you might not need important, very, crazy lights out there. But if you have, photosynthetic organisms like giant clams, corals, you might need a certain kind of lighting. So the important thing, the takeaway from this slide is that there's been a big evolution in lighting from the different T fixtures. The smaller the number, the skinnier the bulb, the more you can put in a fixture, the higher intensity the light is. And then it's really gone to LEDs now, which are great because you have really high intensity light, and you don't really have to change your bulbs out. So back in the day, it used to be expensive to have to change your metal halides or your compact fluorescents or your T5 bulbs, which might last 12 months to 16 months, but LEDs pretty much last indefinitely. There's PAR, which is that thing right here on the bottom, which is a photosynthetic active radiation. Higher you go, the higher PAR you have, the more light demanding creatures like small polyp stony corals or clams might be up there. And then the color temperature can range from anywhere from 6,500 Kelvin, which is natural daylight, to 20,000 Kelvin, which is trying to replicate light at depth. So as you go deeper in the water column, what other wavelengths will be blocked out and the light will be more blue. And it might increase your fluorescence of certain corals because that's pretty cool. So accessories, there are some accessories out there that are pretty much essential. These are just some that I thought of. There's plenty more out there. This is definitely a hobby that if you like gadgets and knickknacks, get into it. Power heads increase flow. That's one you can see on the right. UV sterilizers, ozone systems are just ways to clean up your water a little bit more. Controllers, control probes, and you could see stuff on your phone like real-time temperature data, water parameters. Calcium reactors is another way to get away with not having to dose two-part. Dosing pumps, you can have your two-part automatically dose for you. Siphons, you can remove detritus mechanically. So, that's essential for doing your water changes. Tank cleaners, algae scrapers, nets, turkey basters to sort of blow detritus from your rocks. Pro tip, if you have a kid, don't let them grab your tank magnetic cleaner, put it in the sand, and then go crazy up and down, because you're going to get a bunch of scratches on the side of your tank, and then you'll just be staring at those the whole time. So inhabitants, this is the biggest reason people choose saltwater aquariums. There's, everybody's seen Finding Nemo, Finding Dory. Fish are awesome in saltwater aquariums. You can see that flame angel to the left. That's a really pretty fish. Then there are corals, which are addicting because you can cut them up and trade them, and they grow and they're pretty. You can see them on the bottom right. And then the invertebrates, like there's invertebrates in freshwater tanks, but you don't have cephalopods like cuttlefish and octopus. And I mean, those have special requirements to them, but You know, you could have shrimp and lobsters and gastropods like snails and cool crustaceans like hermit crabs. It's really awesome. So things to consider: what services do they do? You know, you might want to stock that herbivorous fish first because, you know, that's increasing your bio load, but it's also doing a service of eating your algae. Same thing with invertebrates out there. How big does it get? You know, make sure you're able to take care of that tang its whole life, or else the tang police will get you. You know, it's really tempting to put a 2-inch tang in your tank, but they really require over 100 gallons. Will this fish or invertebrate get along with my other tank mates? If you have a harlequin shrimp, you're not going to want to put it with your starfish because they eat starfish. You know, stuff like that. Fish eat other fish. You know, that's really hard to wrap your head around, but that's what they do in the ocean. So make sure your tank mates are compatible. Does it eat coral? Can they live in captivity? There's certain species that really shouldn't be held in captivity. Like nudibranchs that have really specialized diets that pretty much are just watching that thing starve over the period of months. Can I provide a home for its whole life? Same thing with the tang. Captive bred versus wild caught. I can go days for that, but pretty much saltwater and aquaculture is still in its infancy. Besides coral growing, that's really big in terms of the privatized industry. They have propagation down, not so much sexual reproduction. They're still working on that, and a lot of research institutions are doing that. But with fish, there's a small amount of fish that are able to be bred in captivity in terms of saltwater. Those are going to be your clownfish. 99% of those are going to be bred. Substrate spawners, demersal spawners, things with larger eggs that have larger babies. And then quarantine and checking for pests. You want to make sure that if you have a big investment, you want to have a little side tank that you can put that fish in and watch it over a day, two, couple weeks to make sure it doesn't break out with cryptocaryon. Or if you're putting a new piece of coral in your tank, you might want to put on a headlamp and check for flatworms or nudibranchs on there, or give it a dip to prevent that from spreading to other pieces. So collecting your own critters, that's definitely a thing. You can make an area biotope. You can get your cleanup crew from here. It's legal to do if you follow the regulations. That's the FWC page right there. Pretty much a lot of ornamental species, you're only allowed to take 20 species per person per day, no more than 5 species. So a lot of these, you might say they're from the Caribbean, but they're actually from, if you go South Florida or the Keys, you could collect your own cleanup crew. And that's a luxury we have down in Florida that somebody in, you know, maybe New York can't do. And it's actually, it's really fun to do that. I used to do it as a kid all the time. And a thing about it is the community. There are so many resources for you guys that in terms of forums, there's blogs, there's articles, there's magazines, there's how-to videos online. You know, there's a lot of the big suppliers are really responsible in terms of you know, doing reviews on pieces of equipment, running experiments for you. You know, I watched one on whether ceramic media really does do denitrification. You know, they do a great science project for that you can watch. There's organizations, there's clubs, you know, there's events like conferences that they have a lot of scientific speakers come there, and you can learn from that and just talk and learn from other growers. It's a good time. And that picture right here is Reefapalooza in Orlando, which unfortunately they canceled this year because of COVID, but that was really fun to go to. And you can see how many people are here. It's huge now. You know, back when I first started, you had to go to maybe even a lighting store to like get some equipment for your tank lighting. But now there's so much specialty companies out there, and it's really blown up since the internet, and it makes me excited to see what we can grow in the future and how we can make a difference and not, you know, rely on wild caught imports. So yeah, if you'd like to take some time and do this quick poll, it would mean a lot. And you know, if you guys would, you know, say if you want more information on this, or if you'd like a different presentation, or if you want to listen to me talk about aquariums for an hour and a half, 2 hours, I could definitely do that with this same presentation.
Thanks, Mike. So you should see a poll right now on your screen letting us know how much you learned today, as well as please share with us how many of you are watching this webinar on your device. And we'll leave this up for just a couple more seconds. And then if you have questions, we ask that you please type them in the chat box. and we will answer them shortly. All right. And just as a time check, it is 4:30, so we do understand if some of you have to leave. We'd like to thank all of you for joining our Bite Size Science webinar today. And please be sure to check our website and look at our upcoming events on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 4 p.m. and register. We have a lot of new webinars that we've added to our page. So with that, Mike, if you could switch to the next slide, and we will start with the questions in the chat box. Perfect. So there's Mike's contact information if you do want to ask him more questions after this. But in the chat box, we have, what nitrate level equal time for water changes?
That's really just dependent on what your tank is used to. Pretty much do everything slowly. Even if your nitrates are high, if you try to make anything sort of ideal in a reef aquarium, that might mess something up. So like reduce your nitrates slowly. And it's actually really hard to reduce a lot of your nitrates just from water changes. It really requires that sort of periodic maintenance. And there's different ways that you can try to reduce your nitrates from, there's products out there that claim that with a combination of skimming, you can, skim out some of the nitrates. I'm actually experimenting with carbon dosing, which I'm putting organic carbon in my tank to boost my biofilter in terms of trying to skim that out. But I've had my nitrates super high, and I've never had like a super negative effect, but at the same time, over time, that could make detrimental effects. But I would say anything like in the 10 range, like watch out, start doing stuff. But I've had them as high as 60 and not had things keel over right away. And that's part of a million.
The next question is, what is two-part dosing?
So two-part dosing is a way that you can increase your calcium level and your alkalinity level, which will be, I think they use calcium chloride, and I think for alkalinity, they might use sodium bicarb. It just depends. There's powdered versions of that, and then there's liquid dosing of two-part. And the reason it's two-part, like I said before, is because if you added them together, you're just going to make limestone technically. So adding them separately will make them more bioavailable for your corals to sort of develop that skeleton. For your alkalinity, it's going to make it more available for your biofilter. It's going to make it more available for your coral skeletons and have that buffering capacity. So in my opinion, I think alkalinity is more important than calcium, but it's important to have both of those in check.
Perfect. Our next question says, I'm working on a 30-gallon brackish water tank with seagrass for restoration. What are the parameters needed to grow Haliduli rhydi within a brackish water tank?
If I'm not mistaken, Haliduli might be an algae that has a higher calcium level to it. So I would say higher calcium levels. And the thing about it, which is beautiful, is that you're essentially having a refugium, which is a type of, a way to scrub out your nitrates. So you basically have your own like sort of biofilter going on. If you have organisms in there, you could feed them, and if your nitrates accumulate, your algae should grow and sort of take care of that for you.
All right, our next question asks, as far as brackish water tanks go, what is a good pH range for a tank that has 16 to 20 parts per thousand?
Oh man, I'm not super familiar with that, but I mean, I'm sure it could fluctuate. The thing about brackish water tanks is those fish are pretty euryhaline, which are pretty forgiving in terms of what kind of environment they live in, because if it rains one time a year, that pH can be way lower, and if it's dry, it could be higher. So that's the positives of doing a brackish water tank, is they might be more forgiving than these reef organisms that experience very little fluctuation, because they live in these stenohaline sort of offshore environments where ideally nutrient levels and water parameters don't fluctuate as much.
What is a wet dry filter?
So a wet dry filter is sort of an older kind of style where you might have some filter pads and you might have some bio balls, and pretty much you have water siphoned from the top of your tank into, let's call your wet dry a sump because it'll be below your tank, and the water will trickle through these bio balls, which will have higher surface area content in order to boost your beneficial bacteria level. And that they were popular early on, but now they're sort of stemming away from them because if you're not up with your maintenance, you might have the heterotrophic bacteria accumulate on there from either too much detritus, because these beneficial bacteria live on a thin film. If you have a thick film, that it'll sort of choke them out, and you're going to be doing some bad stuff instead of good stuff for your tank.
All right, and the person who was asking about the Halodilurite in her seagrass restoration tank, she wanted to note that it's a flowering seagrass for aquatic vegetation. Do you have any thing you would like to add for what parameters she might need to grow that Halodilurite within a brackish tank?
She might want to, I know we have specialists that do a lot of seagrass restoration work. Savannah Berry is somebody that comes to mind that she works with a lot of seagrass, so we could ask her about that. Josh Patterson, I'm sure, would know. And don't we have a program that's sort of classes and grasses or something like that, where we could maybe find that information for them? I don't want to give them wrong information.
Sure, we can forward that to her. Our next question is, if you were just starting out in the saltwater tank hobby, what kind of tank would you recommend?
I would recommend probably one of those all-in-one tanks, and just do your research in order to not overstock it. It's easy to get super excited and put 4 or 5 clownfish in there, but really you might want 1 or 2. I mean, you could do 2, whatever. It just make sure you don't overstock it. Make sure you do some sort of testing of the water. Test kits are cheap. You could go to Petco, PetSmart, get one for $20. But those tanks are really good in order to, they have your filtration in there that's adequate for enough, life support for something responsible grown in there. They have your light in there. They're relatively cheap. You could probably get one for $200-300. There's a lot of used ones on the market out there, and I mean, I like them. I have one, and you can modify it. That's the fun thing about this hobby. You could always add external things to it. I have an all-in-one that I plumb to a sump and have a big protein skimmer on. So do your research, and there's a lot of cool forums. Go to NanoReef and check them out.
All right, thanks, Mike. I don't see any more questions in the chat box. So we'd like to again thank everyone for joining us today, and we hope to see you at our future Bite Size Science webinars.
Thanks, guys.